In a city that never really does sleep, one small act would stir something no slogan could. You would not believe how one night shifted the perceptions of millions regarding power, loss, and hope. If you've ever wondered what it takes to steady a city on the edge, press play to dive in. They say a city never actually sleeps, but occasionally, it wakes to discover it's on the brink of something it can't quite define. What occurs when the loudest boasts start to ring empty, and the softest voice in the room becomes the most important one? In a single night, New York watched two men stand beneath the same bright lights, one armed with slogans, the other with stories that no one could ignore. Can truth alone steady a city that's forgotten how to hope? Tonight, you'll hear a story of grief and courage, ambition and regret, and the moment when millions realized they still had a voice worth fighting for. New York State Rep. Zohran Mamdani was set to go head-to-head with Vice President JD Vance in an intense post-primary debate. People were expecting sparks to fly as Zohran was set to showboating on live TV, but JD Vance wasn't planning on pulling any punches. In a matter of seconds, the audience would be left agog at Vance's swift response. An unforgettable statement would turn the entire debate on its head, reducing Mamdani to stunned silence. The country was already buzzing. Just hours earlier, Zohran Mamdani had stunned everyone by clinching a victory in the New York City Democratic mayoral primary. Almost immediately after the results rolled in, Mamdani, known for his uncompromising views, jumped onto social media with a bold challenge. "JD Vance," he declared, "you and your boss Trump are tearing this country apart. Debate me live, if you're not too scared." Vance didn't wait long to react. Cool, calm, and to the point, he just tweeted, "Happy to. Let's give the American people clarity." The debate was booked within a day. Networks nationwide preempted prime time. Manhattan was set as the backdrop, and millions watched, ready to see the confrontation. Nobody could have anticipated just what was about to happen. Mamdani stepped onto the stage like a boxer ready for a title fight, eyes blazing, fists clenched. Vance entered quietly, adjusting his microphone and giving the audience a polite nod. Then the countdown began. 3.2.1. The cameras went live. The moderator had barely finished the welcome when Mamdani leaned forward and landed the first punch. "JD Vance," he declared, voice charged, "you're nothing but Trump's lapdog. I'm here to end your lies tonight." A collective gasp moved through the crowd. Vance did not even blink. He cocked his head, nearly as if a professor awaiting a student to complete a tantrum. The moderator attempted to intervene, but Mamdani dismissed him. "Vice President, you call yourself," Mamdani went on, his tone increasing, "but you serve a man who stokes division. Me? I'm here to bring together, to repair this shattered city, beginning by pulling down your rotten systems." The crowd was silent, transfixed. Mamdani continued, running off his ambitious agenda with pride. "No more NYPD, no more prisons, no more ICE raids, no more guns, no more cash bail. I'll legalize sex work. I'll open safe drug sites, because New Yorkers deserve freedom." The cameras cut to Vance. He hadn't spoken yet. "You're afraid of ideas, JD," Mamdani pressed, pointing a finger in his direction, "because ideas threaten that little box you and Trump reside in." Lastly, Vance leaned forward. His voice was firm and low. "Zohran, I arrived here tonight to discuss ideas, not insanity," he started. "You wish to free this city by making it a playground for crime, chaos, and disaster." You could have heard a pin drop. "And tonight," he continued, staring Mamdani down, "I'm going to expose America to exactly who you are." The audience took their collective breath. Vance slowly reached into his jacket and pulled out a single sheet of paper. Calmly, he held it up for everyone to see. "This," he said, "is a leaked internal memo from your campaign. It outlines your plans to end all cooperation with ICE and immediately stop all prison sentences, even for violent offenders. Gasps swept through the studio. Mamdani's jaw tightened. Vance didn't pause. "You speak of freedom," he said, voice deepening with passion. "But what of the freedom of a mother taking her child home from school without fear of an addict flashing a needle on the sidewalk?" And then he turned, speaking directly to the camera. "Zohran," he told her, "you don't want to govern New York. You want to take it apart, brick by brick. You want to make this city an experiment in lawlessness, driven by fantasies and foreign ideologies that have no business here." And then came the moment that would go viral worldwide. "You're not running to be mayor of New York," Vance asserted. "You're running to be the mayor of mayhem." The audience reacted in outrage. Some leapt to their feet, some dried their eyes, others simply gazed in shock. Mamdani blanched. He parted his lips to respond, but couldn't find the words. Vance looked out at the audience and continued, nearly softly, "And tonight, I brought the receipts." For an instant, the entire studio hung in suspension. JD Vance's words, "You're not running to be mayor of New York. You're running to be the mayor of mayhem," were still echoing in the hush. Zohran Mamdani sat motionless, lips parted, struggling to recover from the blow. And then the ripple began. The crowd started murmuring. A few people broke into applause. Reporters bent over their laptops, typing furiously. Phones illuminated throughout the nation. Twitter was already on fire, hashtags piling up by the minute. But Vance wasn't finished yet. "You call me a servant," he stated calmly. "And you're correct. At least I serve the American people. You, Zohran, you serve something else. Something evil." Mamdani shifted in his chair uncomfortably. "Let's not forget," Vance went on, holding up another piece of paper, "you once tweeted that prisons need to be removed from the map. That law enforcement is, in your own words, a tool of white supremacy." He stopped, his gaze unwavering on Mamdani. "Is that what you'd say to a grieving mother whose son was stabbed on a subway train last week?" A woman sitting in the front row suddenly broke down in tears. Just 2 weeks earlier, her son had been murdered. For the first time, the audience felt the real human cost of Mamdani's promises. JD Vance now had the room in his pocket. He never raised his voice. He wasn't dramatic. He was accurate. "Zohran, you tell us you want to assist the poor," Vance continued, his voice almost kind. "But let's be truthful with people tonight." He dug into his folder once more. The cameras zoomed in as he displayed a batch of documents, bank statements, campaign reports, donations marked with yellow highlight. "Your campaign took more than $400,000 from foreign-tied PACs," he told her. "You referred to them as solidarity contributions. But do New Yorkers know those funds were passed through shadow groups in Uganda, Qatar, and a company reported by Homeland Security for extremist activity?" Mamdani leapt to his feet, his microphone capturing the sharp gasp. "This is libel," he snarled, cracking voice. Vance didn't even blink. "Then tell us about it," he answered firmly. "Now, explain to these good people why your campaign finance report looks like a criminal indictment file." The crowd didn't applaud. They didn't jeer. They just looked, absorbing it all, processing. Then Vance shifted his gaze back to the camera. "New York needs a mayor who will defend its people," he declared. "Not one who wishes to burn our institutions to the ground and dance in the ruins." Mamdani slumped back in his chair. For the first time that evening, he seemed small. The moderator's voice shook as he intervened. "Representative Mamdani," he asked gently, "would you like to reply?" Zohran stood forward, but the bluster was gone. His voice was no longer booming on the stage. "The vice president. He's distorting facts," he began. "I am for change, true change. Yes, I am against the NYPD, but For justice. I desire freedom." He drifted off. The crowd wasn't swayed. Then, softly, a man rose from the back row. His voice trembled. "My daughter overdosed last year due to your safe injection site policy," he said. "She was 19. Stunned silence descended. Nobody shifted. Mamdani looked down at the papers on his podium. He didn't answer. He couldn't. Vance didn't smirk. He gazed at the sobbing father, his face open and serious. "Sir," he spoke quietly, "sorry for your loss. You didn't have to go through that. No family has to go through that." And in that instant, Americans saw it. JD Vance wasn't politic. He was human. He wasn't seething. He was hurting for the country. All of a sudden, the whole tone of the debate changed. The moderator appeared white. Producers in the control room urgently whispered into headsets. Even anchors broadcasting live from the debate were seated in stunned silence. It was no longer a political confrontation. It was becoming a national reckoning. Zohran Mamdani tried to clear his throat, his words faltering. "These are diversions," he maintained. "I am not here to argue for old systems. I am here to end them. And yes, I said that I would eliminate the NYPD. It's a rotten piece of history. We don't need more prisons. We need more empathy." This time, though, his words didn't have the impact they once did. The room remained still. Someone in the back made a sound, loud enough to be heard, but barely. "Insane." JD Vance slowly swiveled in that direction. "Call that understanding?" he demanded, voice firm. "Let me ask all of you. Would you feel comfortable taking your kids for a stroll through Central Park at night under Zohran's gaze? No police, no bail, no rules." He stopped, lingering on the question. "We did something like that in 2020, he reminded them. "You recall the crime surges, the broken windows, the blood on the sidewalks." The audience had remembered, and you could sense it, the pain, the fear, and the regret bubbling back up to the surface. Mamdani had stirred something volatile. New Yorkers were feeling something awaken within them, something JD Vance had aimed to stir, their memory. A woman rose from the second row, slowly. She held a creased photograph against her chest, her voice shaking. "My son Jamal was gunned down in the Bronx 2 years ago," she said, tears welling in her eyes. "His killer was out on bail. Under your no-punishment policy, Mr. Mamdani." Gasps rippled through the audience. Zohran froze. "You said abolish prisons," the woman continued, her voice cracking as she wept. "But what about justice? My boy never made it to college. He never even got to vote." Mamdani's face twitched with panic. I can't speak on individual cases," he stammered. JD Vance stood up. He walked over and gently took the mother's hand. The camera caught it all, raw, unfiltered, heartbreakingly real. "Ma'am," he said softly, "I'm so sorry for what happened to your son. It should never have happened." Then he turned to Mamdani, his voice low but clear. "This is your legacy," Vance declared. "Not hope, not progress, pain. You hide behind slogans while mothers bury their children." Some of Mamdani's supporters gazed down at the floor as well. The reality was too unbearable to reject. The tears were too genuine to disregard. This wasn't a debate anymore. It was a reckoning. The debate clock ticked down, only 15 minutes remaining, but JD Vance wasn't done. He stretched for one last document, wrapped in an envelope. "Let's finish with the truth," he declared, holding it aloft. "This," he went on, his voice calm, "is a letter from a whistleblower within Zohran's campaign. It discusses plans in case he's elected to shift city money into Transparency is what you wanted, Zohran, Vance told him, eyes unflinching, voice icy. Here it is. You betrayed the people you said you were working for, not for justice, but for your cause, an anti-American one. Mamdani gazed at the paper, then out at the mob, then to the cameras. He remained silent, because there was nothing further to say. Outside the studio, Manhattan streets came alive, phones capturing, humans weeping, crowds filling up bars, stores, and living rooms. Even taxi drivers had stopped to view. Inside, JD Vance took a deep breath. You heard fatigue in his voice. Not tiredness at debate, but at having witnessed America in pain under the hands of individuals like Zohran. We need change, he murmured. Yes, but not chaos. He peered into the lens once more, but this time his words were slower, softer. To every New Yorker who's scared right now, I hear you, he started, voice on the verge of breaking. To every mother who lost a son, to every store owner robbed last night, to every family struggling to feel safe again. He paused, fighting the emotion building in his throat. You deserve a city that shields you, not one that tests on you. A woman in the front of the crowd stood, then another. The subsequent applause wasn't crazy, but it was genuine, sincere. Mamdani appeared smaller than ever in that instant. He didn't say anything. He didn't shift in his seat. He just sat there, soaking it in. And JD Vance, he didn't smirk. He just nodded once, as if to say, this wasn't ever about me. In a quiet corner of the audience, an elderly man stood. His clothes were plain, his hands trembling as he held a folded American flag against his chest. I buried my grandson last year, he said, his voice soft but weighted with grief. He was walking home, just walking. A man high on fentanyl stabbed him. For $5. The studio went silent. Even the cameraman froze. Zohran told me that man shouldn't have been incarcerated, the old man continued, voice trembling. That drugs are a health epidemic, not an offense. JD Vance did not interrupt. He simply listened, his eyes wide with muted sadness. The man breathed a shaky breath. But my son's gone, he whispered. You get it? He's gone. Mamdani stared aghast. He hadn't anticipated this. True stories, actual families, actual suffering. At last Vance spoke, his voice low and even. Sir, your grandson's life counted, he said. And I assure you, there are still politicians in this country who will fight to ensure it never happens again. The crowd started clapping, hesitant, then stronger. The kind of applause that brings tears. Because finally, it felt like someone in authority was listening. JD Vance turned to the moderator. I'd like to share something most people don't know, he said quietly. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded letter. It's from a woman named Isabel, he explained. She used to support Zohran Mamdani's campaign. She believed in reform, until her niece, just 14, was trafficked by a gang running a so-called safe sex work site backed by Zohran's policy advisors. The studio air grew chilly. Even Zohran moved uncomfortably in his chair. Vance opened the letter and read it slowly. They called it freedom, he read softly. But it was hell. We pleaded for assistance, but the city reported it was decriminalized, so they wouldn't put a stop to it. He gazed upward. Her niece is alive, but she doesn't smile anymore. She doesn't sleep, and she doesn't believe anyone in government cares. He laid the letter softly against his chest. I do. And in that moment, even those who disagreed with JD Vance could sense it. This wasn't politics anymore. This was about pain, protection, and the kind of leadership that comes straight from the heart. Zohran Mamdani attempted to reply, but his voice cracked. You're using grief as a weapon. That sentence cut deeper than any slur. It was not an insult. It was a reflection. And Zohran loathed what he saw reflected. Silent, devastated by a whirlwind that had caught him completely off guard, he sat there while another voice emerged from the rear. But the crowd didn't react. They'd seen too much to pretend. JD Vance didn't raise his voice. He didn't even look angry. He looked like a man with nothing left to prove. No, Zohran, he said softly. You used promises to fool people. I'm just showing them the price of believing you. He stepped forward, slowly, calmly. New York is fatigued, he stated. It hurts. And tonight, it required the truth, not slogans. Mamdani sat back down, defeated. His eyes were glazed over, his hands shaking. He'd never envisioned he'd step onto that stage and blow this entirely, not politically, but morally. Then JD Vance did something nobody was expecting. He turned to Zohran, voice soft but firm. You might have used your voice for good, he told her. You still can, but not this way. Not by shattering what's barely intact. A young woman, not yet 20, climbed up to the floor microphone. Her name was Tara. My brother was killed last year, she said, her voice trembling. A 17-year-old with aspirations. He was killed because someone who should have been behind bars was released, and your no-cash bail law made it possible. She stared directly at Mamdani, her eyes reddened but unshakable. You don't know my pain, she told him, voice trembling and low. But you speak like you do. You hide behind slogans, compassion, justice. But they cost us everything. Zohran seemed shaken. He opened his mouth, but nothing issued. JD Vance didn't break in on her. He let the silence hold its own. And when she was done talking, he moved deliberately toward her and placed a soft hand on her shoulder. Tara, he went on, voice gentle but firm. I promise you. He counted. His life counts. And your bravery tonight. It won't be forgotten. Members of the audience started crying openly. No one was looking at Mamdani anymore. The room had reached a decision as to who the true leader was, and it wasn't the man in the sleek suit with buffed catchphrases. It was the quiet warrior who listened. Across the country, something began to shift. Phones buzzed, news clips flooded every social feed. Twitter's trending list lit up with hashtags, #Mayor, of mayhem, #Vance the voice, #Zohran exposed. In Queens, a diner full of retirees watched the replay of JD Vance holding Isabel's letter. In Brooklyn, parents shook their heads, suddenly realizing the danger their kids would face under Mamdani's plans. And in the Bronx, where crime had risen so sharply, a single mother named Clarissa drew her little boy near and whispered, her face streaming with tears, That's the man who cares, baby. That's the one who fights for us. Inside the studio, the moderator hesitated whether to continue. The debate had turned into something else, something greater than politics. Mamdani attempted a final attempt. He stood up rigidly. This isn't fair, he stated, voice reedy. I'm not on trial. JD Vance shifted to face him, his face serene, almost weary. When you seek power over millions, he said, you should be. And there it was, in that one sentence, Mamdani slumped in his chair. There was nothing more to say. The final installment was close at hand. The moderator cleared his throat, preparing to wrap things up, but JD Vance held up his hand tentatively. Let me say one thing more, he said. He moved into the middle of the stage. I want to address the people at home, he started, his voice dropping. Not the donors, not the pundits, just the Americans. The camera zoomed in. His eyes were aglow with a subdued, exhausted emotion. I was raised poor, he said, I saw addiction destroy my family. I've seen capable people crash because nobody cared about them. He breathed deeply, regaining his composure. But I've also seen what happens when we hand over the keys to bad ideas, and worse men. He shifted a bit in Mamdani's direction. Ideas that look great on paper, but result in blood on sidewalks. Then there was the silence, and the words that would appear on every TV in America. This city does not require radicalism, he stated. It requires healing, and healing begins with truth. They stood up, people not in that room alone, but in living rooms, in hospital break rooms, in late-night diners and corner groceries. For the first time in years, they felt something genuine. And Zohran Mamdani, he just looked down at the floor. He knew it was finished. The moderator, shaken herself by the emotion in the room, offered Mamdani one final opportunity to speak. He rose slowly, his voice cracking. I came here to be the voice of the voiceless, he stuttered. To shatter the system. To liberate people. The audience did not respond. They simply gazed at him. Yes. I said, we need to rethink prisons, he continued, seeking any sign of support. But not for criminals. A woman about halfway back to the front stood up, her eyes burning with pain. My daughter was raped, she stated calmly. By a man your campaign defended in court. He was released on no bail. You said he was in need of therapy. Her voice cracked. She hasn't smiled since. Zohran stood stock still. The words stuck in his throat. JD Vance stepped forward. He was not upset. He looked just broken-hearted. You speak of liberating people, he said softly. But all I see are the shackles you have placed on innocent lives. Then he addressed the audience. This debate was not a collision of philosophies, he said. It was an experiment of who cares about your pain, who feels your pain. That caused the last tenuous shred of Mamdani's poise to shatter. For the first time in his career, he had nothing to say. Slowly but surely, members of the audience stood up, not to object, but to leave. First a father of two, then a retired teacher, then a single mother holding a folded flyer with Zohran's face on it. They all turned quietly, tears in their eyes, and walked toward the exits. He doesn't deserve our ears, a woman whispered as she passed. Not after what we've heard. JD Vance didn't gloat. He just nodded, out of respect for their hurt. Even some on Mamdani's own campaign team, recognizing the storm their candidate had walked straight into, began quietly packing up. One advisor was seen leaning close to Zohran's shoulder, whispering something only he could hear. One of Mamdani's aides was hunched over her phone, voice tight with panic. We have to pull the press release. Cancel all post-debate appearances, she whispered frantically. And there Mamdani stood, alone. A man who had entered the spotlight looking to shine, to have the lights turn against him. As stage lights grew dim, JD Vance confronted him. His voice was so low only the microphone picked it up. It's never too late to care, he said softly. But you waited too long. Outside the studio windows, crowds clustered around large TV screens in windows, cafes, and city squares. They watched, some with tears in their eyes, not for political triumph, but because after so long, someone was fighting on their behalf. In Harlem, a grandmother brushed a tear from her cheek, her voice barely above a whisper as she addressed no one in particular. I haven't felt this seen in 20 years. Outside a Staten Island precinct, off-duty police officers stood in silence. One of them whispered, as if in wonder, "That's leadership. That's heart." Inside, JD Vance stood before the moderator to deliver his closing remarks. This was never about titles, he started out, his voice calm. Not mayor, not vice president. He paused, gazing directly into the camera as if he were addressing each individual watching at home. It's about responsibility. If you want power in this country, you have to earn it with compassion, not chaos. He took a slow breath. Protect your children, respect your laws, and never, never trade safety for slogans. The crowd didn't cheer. Instead, they stood up, many of them wiping away their tears. The debate was over. But the moment it created, it was only just beginning. Off stage, once the cameras went dark, Zohran Mamdani was alone in a dressing room, his jacket crooked off one shoulder, his hands shaking as he scrolled through his phone. Headline after headline flashed, Zohran pummeled in live debate by JD Vance. JD Vance, the voice of reason in a city in need of help. Mayor of Mayhem reaches 30 million views in 2 hours. His team had disappeared. The same individuals who had supported him when he assaulted Vance were nowhere to be seen. Zohran gazed into the mirror. For the first time, he didn't see a future mayor. He saw a man exposed, a man who had believed that he could play games with people's lives and lost. In the meantime, JD Vance strolled slowly down the studio corridors with only 2 aides in tow. He wasn't jubilant. He was recalling the weeping mother, the kid stabbed over nothing, the young girl trafficked and the city turning a blind eye. That was not a debate, he breathed softly as if to himself. That was a funeral for dead ideas. One of his aides glanced at him tenderly. Are you all right? Vance nodded, but deep in his eyes you could see he was not thinking about winning. He was thinking about justice. Something unusual occurred that night in New York. Individuals who had never made themselves heard spoke out. A handwritten note was taped up by the owner of a deli in the Bronx in the window. We support JD Vance. We want peace in our streets again. In Queens, a teacher brought her students into a circle. They bowed their heads and prayed for safety, for truth, for a city that wouldn't be betrayed again. Even a group of disenchanted former Mamdani supporters gathered in hushed tones at a community center. One man rose to his feet, his voice trembling. I voted for him in the primary, he confessed. But after tonight, I realized I never asked the right questions. I let the slogans blind me. And the videos continued to spread. Snapshots of JD Vance placing a reassuring hand on the mourning father's shoulder. Reading Isabel's letter, uttering the words no one could forget. New York may not survive you. Americans started crying one by one, not only due to sadness, but due to recognition. This wasn't a book. This was their life. And JD Vance had put it in words they could finally believe. The following morning, another clip went viral. It hadn't been included in the broadcast debate. It was discreetly filmed by someone in the wings. JD Vance alone in a tight corridor, hands clasped, head in his hands, whispering. It wasn't his reputation that tormented JD Vance at the time. It was what might have been. Zohran Mamdani might have utilized his pulpit to actually reform, to care, to actually help. But rather, he employed it for separation, for devastation, for conducting experiments on lives. A passing cleaning staff member stopped when she noticed Vance standing by himself, head bent. She had spoken gently. Are you praying, sir? Vance lifted his head, his eyes brimming with tears. For those who were unable to speak last night, he breathed, and for those who will continue to suffer if we lose. The staffer said nothing more, but she recorded it silently and uploaded it online. By lunchtime, that video had 18 million views. One of them read, I haven't cried this way in years. I didn't vote for Trump, but JD Vance, he's different. In living rooms, in truck stops, in fire stations all over America, people saw that brief video and cried. Because it wasn't political. It was human. No spin, no noise, just a man praying for strangers. And in a dimly lit room somewhere, Zohran Mamdani sat alone, watching that same video. For the first time since the debate, he was afraid. The pressure building on Mamdani was crushing. News anchors were openly speculating if he would pull out. Local activist organizations disavowed him. Community leaders who had once cheered his name were now silent. Late in the evening, in a closed-door press conference, Mamdani was supposed to issue a statement. The cameras were already rolling. Microphones awaited. He approached the podium, ashen, tired, and cleared his throat. "Last night was difficult," he started. A silence. The room held its breath. "But I stand by my vision. A radical rethinking of the way this city is run is still needed. No apology, no regret." JD Vance sat in a small staff room, huddled on a couch with some of the firefighters in front of a muted television. He shook his head. He had his opportunity, Vance believed. One opportunity to do this right, to prove he had a heart. And he blew it. One of the firefighters let out a soft sigh, voice low and weary. "Don't care, sir. Not for us. Not for the streets." That silence in the room spoke louder than any headline ever could. Zohran might have uttered a single word, "Sorry," and perhaps everything would have been different, but he doubled down instead, and New York City turned its back. As JD Vance walked out of the station into the biting night air, his phone vibrated. It was President Trump. "You proud the country last night," the president said, his voice warm. That wasn't just a victory, it was an alarm clock. Vance didn't rejoice. "Mr. President, the things we heard," he swallowed hard. "They shattered something inside me. This isn't politics anymore, this is survival." Trump hesitated for a moment. When he next spoke, his voice had thawed. "Then go get it done," he said. "Make them see what leadership actually is." That was not an approving call. That was something more, a torch passing. At JD's hotel, reporters were already gathered in the lobby. One of them pushed forward, microphone in hand. "Vice President Vance, what's next?" He hesitated, his eyes weary but firm. "Now," he declared, voice firm, "we stand our ground. We stand up for the people, and we ensure no one like Zohran Mamdani ever gets this close to the levers of power again." Millions of citizens around the country watched in real time. In living rooms, on phones, in waiting rooms at hospitals. Audiences stood, applauded. For in that instant, they no longer heard JD Vance's voice alone. They heard their own. That night, a handwritten letter arrived at Vance's hotel. No return address, just a folded sheet tucked inside. He opened it carefully, his hands starting to tremble by the second paragraph. "Dear Mr. Vance, you don't know me. I'm the mother of a boy who died from a fentanyl overdose last year. The policies Mr. Mamdani promotes, they gave my son his last hit. He was promised help. He got a death sentence." JD Vance sat down on the edge of his bed, the letter trembling in his hand, his breath held in his chest. He stared into the camera and recited the last words of the letter out loud. "We failed you. I broke because it was the first time someone in power didn't lie. Thank you. I'll never forget your words. My boy would have trusted you. So do I." When he was done, JD Vance folded the paper slowly, reverently, and tucked it into his inside coat pocket, next to Isabel's letter. Then, barely making a whisper that reached the microphone, "We won't fail the next one." He didn't weep, but millions of viewers at home did. The sun had come up over New York City with a stillness that seemed near to holy. It seemed the whole city had stopped to catch its breath. The debate had aired 9 hours ago, but somehow, it already had shaken the entire nation. In the Bronx, murals were being installed, depictions of JD Vance standing next to the weeping father whose child had been killed. Outside a vintage church in Brooklyn, candles stood on the sidewalk. A sign in the window, scrawled by hand, "We hear you, JD. Thank you for fighting for our children." Phone lines at news stations were jammed with calls and mail from ordinary people, single, parents, war veterans, school teachers, custodians. They called to tell them that they had wept, that finally they felt heard. On the way to the airport, JD Vance's motorcade slowed down, approaching a cluster of school children clustered on the sidewalk. He told the driver to pull over. No press corps, no hurrying aides, just him. One little girl looked up, eyes shining with expectation. "Thank you for protecting us," she whispered. "Are you going to keep doing that?" Vance dropped down to knee level so they were at eye level. "Yes, sweetie," he said softly. "As long as I'm breathing." Those watching from their living rooms, mothers, grandfathers, strangers, couldn't help it. They wept, because in that small, simple moment, America remembered what real leadership looks like. Meanwhile, Zohran Mamdani sat alone in his dark apartment. The blinds were drawn, the TV was off. The silence was so loud it pressed against his ears. Campaign donations were drying up. Allies were slipping away. His team had vanished. His name, once uttered with respect, was now invoked in warning. "Don't pull a Mamdani." The same individual who had swaggered onto the stage of debate, so confident, was now a national joke. But the true cost wasn't his reputation. It was the lives he never grasped. JD Vance didn't gloat. He didn't ridicule him. He just moved on, with the burden of every letter, every shattered voice, every life that Zohran's policies had come close to destroying. New York had been pulled back from the brink. One morning, in a moment of quiet, Vance leaned over to one of his aides and whispered, "But how many cities weren't given that opportunity?" The tale of Zohran Mamdani didn't end in firecrackers. It ended in silence. And sometimes, silence is the loudest form of justice. A week later, JD Vance delivered a brief national speech. Not on a grand stage, not behind a podium, just from a kitchen table. No suit, a simple shirt, a plain man. He faced the camera. No script, no notes. "This wasn't about a debate," he declared, steady voice. "This was about a city crying out for help. I didn't win anything. The truth did." He hesitated, his voice breaking slightly. "I want every American who is seeing this to know something. You are not forgotten. Not by me, not by President Trump, not by the millions who still believe this country is worth saving." Then the last words, the ones that would be a poster, a hashtag, a movement. "If they try to take your voice, I'll be your echo." That one sentence shattered America's heart wide open.